every month, and they were issuing the policies and doing all the work in the state of New York. Now that
so that created a nexus, a connection that triggered. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, so there's certain situations, right? If there's a nexus, if that customer is issuing the policies, conducting everything in that state, then there are some situations where I would advise the client strongly to pay the self-procurement tax. But ultimately, that's not the advice the captive manager. They can mention it, what their thoughts are, their experience, but that's where they need to get their attorney, their trusted counsel, to review that. But I think generally the answer is most clients do not pay that tax, but there could be some extenuating circumstances that you're going to look into that further. Stephen asked another good question. He talked about going through the cap of what we call a 501c15 captive, which is a smaller type of captive arrangement. But his question could apply to these larger 831B captives. But he wanted to know if you had somebody owning more than one captive, would would that violate a gross receipts test? And what I believe, Steve, what you're referring to is what we call the rules of attribution. I believe that's section 1562 of the code. Under this section of the tax code, we have to look at the ownership. So we can't just have one individual own 5 or 6 captives if they qualify for, say, $5 or $6 million of premium, and that one individual owns each captive. We've got to look at those rules of attribution to see if more than one captive can be done. Now, on that point, I don't believe anybody, in my opinion, should do more than one captive in the first year for a business. I just don't think that's a reasonable, conservative thing to do. I know it's done in the industry, but my advice is always start with one captive. I know the planning kind of murks up because you have to readjust the ownership of the first captive when you do the second one down the road, but I do believe that's the most conservative way to do it. So let's not try to scrape the bottom of the peanut jar. Let's just try to do one at a time would be my best advice right now. All right, well, let's get back into the presentation. Lots of great questions here. Now, going back, this slide just highlights the potential savings for 1 year. Again, what we have here is a captive and no captive column. Under the no captive column, we're assuming a profitable business, and it's going to, those shareholders, this is an LLC or S Corp in my assumption, they're going to be paying ordinary income tax rates. Now, under the captive scenario, they're going to be paying the long-term capital gains qualified dividends upon distribution. Now, let me back up here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we need to show claims activity. Again, 10% or higher is the ideal amount when you structure these programs to make sure there are claims occurring. Could be more. I'm not saying 10% should happen every year. It's just that you need to show the activity. Administrative fees, as I mentioned, could run anywhere from 7 to 10%, depending upon the size of the captive. And that would include the captive management fees, the audit, actuary, legal, premium tax for the domicile. That would be an all-encompassing admin fee. Investment income. Now, the investment income is going to be a little less the first year with the captive. Why is that? Because we had to pay admin fees. Now, if you look at this over time and we let the capital and surplus build up and compound every year, then the investment income would be much greater. In fact, clients that are in one of these anywhere from 5 to 7 years or longer, the primary savings becomes the investment income on the deferral of the taxation that you would pay. Now, if you net everything out here, that is your total underwriting income. As you'll notice, the big difference here is on the tax, though, between the captive and no captive scenario. You got about a